Kronos, who the Phoenicians call El, who was a king of the country and subsequently, after his decree, was deified as the star Saturn, had by a nymph of the country named Anobret, an only begotten son, whom on this account was called Yedud, the only begotten being still so called among the Phoenicians. And when very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel, prepared an altar, and sacrificed him, and then circumcised himself, and made it a custom among the Phoenicians from that day forward. The oldest attested version of Genesis goes back to Sanchuniathon, before the collapse of the Bronze Age, and his writings survived in temples. And according to Philo of Byblos, this is what it says. Philo of Byblos' writings are passed down through Eusebius, and this is all we have left. The first principle of the universe. Dark air with cloud and wind, or rather a blast of cloudy air, and turbid chaos, dark as Erebus, and these were boundless, and for long ages had no limit. But when the wind became enamored of its own parents, and a mixture took place, the connection was called Eros, desire. This was the beginning of all creation of all things, but the wind itself had no knowledge of its own creation. From its connection, Mot was produced, which some say is mud, and others a watery compound. And out of this came every germ of creation, and the generation of the universe. So there were certain animals which had no sensation, and out of them grew intelligent animals, and were called Zophosimon, that is, observers of heaven. And they were formed like the shape of an egg. Also Mot burst forth into light, and sun and moon and stars and the great constellations. Such was their cosmogony, introducing downright atheism. But let us now see how Sanchuniathon states the generation of animals to have arisen. He says, "And when the air burst into light, both the sea and the land become heated, and thence arose winds and clouds, and very great downpours, and floods of waters of heaven. After the waters are separated and removed from their proper place because of the sun's heat, and all met together again in the air, dashing together one against another, thunderings and lightnings were produced. And at the rattle of the thunder, the intelligent animals already described woke up, and were scared at the sound, and began to move both on land, sea, male and female. Such is the theory of the generation of animals. Next, after this, Sanchuniathon adds, these things were found written in the cosmogony of Tatus, in his commentaries, both from conjectures and from evidences which his intellect discerned and discovered and made clear to us. Tatus is called Thoth by the Egyptians, and Hermes to the Greeks. Next to this, after mentioning the names of the winds Notos and Boreas and the rest, he continues, but these were the first who consecrated the productions of the earth, and regarded them as gods, and worshipped them as being the support of life both to themselves and to those who were to come after them, and to all before them, and they offered to them drink offerings and libations. These were the notions of worship corresponding to their own weakness and timidity of the soul. Then he says that from the wind Colpius and his wife Baal, which he translate as night, were born Aeon and Protogonus, mortal men, so called, and that Aeon discovered the food obtained from trees, that their offspring were called Ginos and Genea, and inhabited Phoenicia, and that when droughts occurred, they stretched out their hands to heaven towards the sun. For him alone they regarded as God and Lord of heaven, calling him Bilsamen, which in the Phoenician language means Lord of heaven, and in Greek, Zeus. And after this he charges the Greeks with error, saying, "For it is not without cause that we have explained these things in many ways, but in view of later misinterpretations of the names are in history, which the Greeks in ignorance took in a wrong sense, being deceived by the ambiguity of the translation. From Ginos, son of Ion, and Protogonus were begotten again mortal children, whose names are Light, Fire, and Flame. These, says he, discovered fire from rubbing pieces of wood together, and taught the use of it. And they begat sons of surpassing size and stature, whose names were applied to the mountains which they occupied, so that from them were named Cassius, Lavinus, Antilabinus, and Brathi. From these were begotten Memrumus and Hypsiranius, and they got their names from their mothers, as the women in those days had free intercourse with any whom they met. Hypsirianus inhabited Tyre, and contrived huts out of reeds and rushes and papyrus, and he quarreled with his brother Ausuos, who first invented a covering for the body from skins of wild beasts, which he was strong enough to capture. And when furious rains and winds occurred, the trees in Tyre were rubbed against each other and caught fire, and burnt down the wood that was there. And Ausuos took a tree, and having stripped off the branches, was first who ventured to embark on the sea, and be consecrated 2 pillars to fire and wind, and worshipped them, and poured libations of blood upon from the wild beasts that he took in hunting. But Hypsiranius and Ausuos were dead. Those were left consecrated staves to them, and year by year worshipped their pillars and kept festivals in their honor. But many years afterwards, from the race of the Ellipsiranius were born Agrius and Halius, the inventors of hunting and fishing, from whom were named huntsmen and fishermen. And from there were born 2 brethren, discoverers of iron and mode of working it. The one whom Chrysor practiced oratory and incantations and divinations, and that he was Hephaestus, and invented the hook, bait, line, and raft, and was the first of all men to make voyage. Wherefore they reverenced him also as a god after his death. And he was also called Zeus Melikios. And some say that his brothers invented walls of brick. Afterwards there sprang from their race 2 youths, one whom was called Technites, the artificer, and the other Gynos Autochthon, earth-born aboriginal. These devised the mixing of straw with the clay of bricks and drying them in the sun, and moreover invented roofs. From them others were born, one whom was called Agros, and the other agrarios and or argrots. And of the latter there is in Phoenicia much venerated statue, a shrine drawn by yokes of oxen, and among the people of Byblos he is named the greatest of the gods. These two devised, in addition, 2 houses of courts and enclosures and caves. From them came husbandmen and huntsmen. They are also called Elatae and Titans. From these were born Eminos and Magus, who established villages and sheepfolds. From them came Mesor and Sidak, that is to say, just or righteous. These discovered the use of salt. From Mesor was born Tautus, who invented the first alphabet of the Egyptians, who calls him Thoth, the Greeks Hermes. From Sidak came the Dioscuri, or the Cabieri, or Corybantes, or Samothraces. These, he says, invented the first ship, from having sprung others, who discovered herbs and healing of venomous bites and charms. In their time is born another called Elion, the Most High, and female named Beirut, and these dwelt in the neighborhoods of Byblos. And from them is born Abigaeus, or Autochthon, whom they afterwards called Aranos, so that from him they named the element above as Aranos, because of the excellence of its beauty. And he has a sister of the aforesaid parents, who is called Gaia, Earth. And from her, he says, because of her beauty, they call the earth the same name. And their father, the Most High, died in an encounter with wild beasts, and was deified, and his children offered to him libations and sacrifices. And Aranos, having succeeded his father's rule, takes to himself in marriage his sister Gaia, and gets by her 4 sons: El, who is called Kronos, Baetalus, and Dagon, who is Ceton, and Atlas. Also by other wives, Aranos begot a numerous progeny, on which account Gaia was angry, and from jealousy began to reproach Aranos, so that they even separated from each other. But Aranos, after he had left her, used to come upon her with violence whenever he chose, and consort with her, and go away again. He used to try also to destroy his children by her, but Gaia repelled him many times, having gathered to herself allies. And when Kronos, who was called El, had advanced to manhood, he, with the consulship and help of Hermes Trismegistus, who was his secretary, repelled his father Aranos, and avenged their mother Gaia. To El are born children, Persephone and Athena. The former died a virgin, but by the advice of Athena and Hermes Trismegistus, El made a sickle and a spear of iron. Then Hermes talked magical words to the allies of El, and inspired them with the desire of fighting against Aranos on behalf of Gaia. So Kronos, who was called El, and Saturn, inspired them with a desire of fighting against Aranos on behalf of Gaia. And thus Kronos engaged in war and drove Aranos from his government, and succeeded that to the kingdom. Also there was taken in battle the beloved concubine of Aranos, being great with child, who El gave in marriage to Dagon, and in his house she gave birth to the child begotten of Aranos, and she named him Damaris. After this, El builds a wall around his own dwelling and found the first city, Byblos, in Phoenicia. So after this he became suspicious of his own brother Atlas. With the advice of Hermes, threw him into a deep pit and buried him. About this time, the descendants of the Dioscuri put together rafts and ships and made voyages, and being cast ashore near Mount Cassius, consecrated a temple there. And the allies of El, who was called Kronos, were surnamed the Elohim, as these same who were surnamed after El, who would be called the Croni, after Kronos.